Keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Menghadap ke bawah Duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, Tuanku Muhriz Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun. Sembah patik, mohon diampun. Patik bagi pihak pengurusan tertinggi dan warga UKM menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berangkat mencemar duli menghadiri syarahan Canselor Tuanku Muhriz kali ketiga pada pagi ini. Sesungguhnya keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku merupakan suatu penghormatan kepada seluruh warga Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Ampun Tuanku, patik seterusnya memohon limpah berkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patik meneruskan atur cara majlis di dalam bahasa Inggeris serta mengalu-alukan hadirin sekalian. Ampun Tuanku. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning. Yang amat mulia, Tunku Besar Seri Menanti, Tunku Ali Ridauddin, Ibni Tuanku Muhriz. Yang amat mulia, Tunku Laksmana, Tunku Datuk Seri Utama Naqiyuddin, Ibni Tuanku Jaafar, Pro-Chancellor of UKM. Yang amat berbahagia, Tun Ahmad Sarji Abdul Hamid, Pro-Chancellor of UKM. The Right Honourable, the Tan Sri Datuk Sri Panglima Richard Malanjum, Chief Justice of Malaysia. Yang amat berhormat, Tuan Haji Aminuddin Harun, Menteri Besar of Negeri Sembilan. The Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Ke, Chancellor of Aberystwyth University and distinguished speaker of the third Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz Lecture. Yang amat mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin, Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Professor Elizabeth Treasure, Vice Chancellor Aberystwyth University, Professor Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, Vice Chancellor of UKM, Professor Datuk Dr. Imran Ho Abdullah, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Industry and Community Partnerships, UKM, members of the Royal Family, members of UKM Board of Directors, distinguished guests, lead Deputy Vice-Chancellors of UKM, ladies and gentlemen. Praise be to Allah for His blessing as we are all gathered here today for the third Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz Lecture that will be delivered by the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Ke in a short while. We would also like to extend a warm welcome to all distinguished guests to this historic event. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to bless this ceremony, please welcome Ustad Khairil Khuzairi Omar to lead us in reciting the dua.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Al-Fatiha. A'udzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki yaumiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا عبرة للمعتبرين وموعظة للمتقين والسراجا منيرا للمهتدين فكان شفاء لما في الصدور ومصلحا لجميع الأمور والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الذي ختم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ya Allah, Engkau pemilik sekalian alam yang bagimu jua segala kebesaran dan kekuasaan. Kehadratmu puji dan syukur kami rafakkan dengan iradahmu dan limpahan keizinan Majlis Syarahan Canselor Tuanku Muhriz ketiga ini dapat kami langsungkan. Allahumma ya Hannan ya Mannan, kepadamu segala kesyukuran kami sembahkan atas keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Persatuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Muhriz Ibn Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, berkatilah pertemuan kami ini, berkatilah juga usaha-usaha kami, ilhamkanlah dalam fikiran dan minda kami idea-idea yang bernas, pandangan-pandangan yang jelas dan keputusan-keputusan yang waras. Kurniakanlah kepada kami limpahan ilmu yang berguna dan kefahaman yang benar. Satukanlah hati-hati kami, eratkanlah silaturahim di kalangan kami. Padukanlah tenaga dan usaha kami untuk memartabatkan pendidikan bangsa secara bersama demi mencapai kecemerlangan dan kegemilangan. Ya Allah, ya Zal Jalali wal Ikram, jadikanlah kami, ya Allah, daripada kalangan hamba-hambamu yang taat dan bersyukur. Jauhkanlah kami, ya Allah, daripada melanggar perintahmu. Kurniakanlah kepada kami kesihatan yang berpanjangan, kesejahteraan yang sempurna, fikiran yang waras, minda yang cergas, rezeki yang halal, zuriat dan generasi yang beriman. Dan kurniakanlah kepada kami segala kebaikan di dunia dan juga di akhirat. Allahumma inna nas'aluka minal khairi kullihi ajilihi wa ajilihi ma alimna wa ma lam na'lam. ونعوذ بك من الشر كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا وما لم نعلم ونسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم طور أعمارنا في طاعتك وطاعة رسولك وصحة أجسادنا في صحة وعافية والسلامة ونور قلوبنا كما نورت الأرض بنور شمسك أبدا أبدا وثبت إيماننا كإيمان أنبيائك وأوليائك الصالحين وطهر قلوبنا من العجب والرياء والنقصان وارزقنا رزقا حلالا واسعا طيبا مباركا جميلا. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. تقبل الله منكم منا ومنكم تقبل يا كريم.
Amin ya Rabbal Alameen. May our Lord bless us. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our event this morning will be continued with a multimedia presentation of the Third Chancellor Tuanku Muhri's lecture. Let us enjoy it. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now is the royal address by His Royal Highness Yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, Tuanku Muhriz Ibn Almarhum Tuanku Munawir. With great pleasure, we would like to invite Yang Berbahagia Profesor Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali to welcome His Royal Highness Tuanku Muhriz Ibn Almarhum Tuanku Munawir to deliver the royal address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. UKM, as Malaysia's premier national university, is committed to its role as a guardian of the nation. It acts as a repository and conduit of knowledge and innovates ideas for socio-economic development for the well-being of society. This lecture series aims to be the pinnacle of scholarship through intellectual discourse from sharing of ideas and experiences of distinguished luminaries, thereby acting as a platform to provide concrete solutions to issues of public affairs, good governance, integrity, and law. We have a good attendance for this morning's event, which I note in particular includes serving as well as retired senior members of the Malaysian judiciary and heads of missions of foreign countries. This bears testimony to the distinguished standing of the Speaker, the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Ke, who was the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales and is the present Chancellor of Aberystwyth University. I am especially pleased and thankful that Lord Thomas accepted the invitation to deliver this lecture, as I had spent my undergraduate years as a law student at Aberystwyth University. This event is organized through cooperation between UKM, Aberystwyth University, and the Aberystwyth Alumni Club of Malaysia, and I also thank them. Recent revelations of gross misuse of authority in this country show that understanding and adherence to the rule of law is even more relevant than ever before. The subject of today's lecture is therefore timely, and I look forward to hearing Lord Thomas's experiences and thoughts on whether the rule of law. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Menjunjung kasih Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, prior to the delivery of Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz's lecture, let us introduce the distinguished speaker. Without further ado, we would like to invite Yang Berbahagia Profesor Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali to introduce our distinguished speaker for the third Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz's lecture.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Menghadap ke bawah duli yang maha mulia, Yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, Tuanku Muhriz Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik bagi pihak pengurusan tertinggi dan warga UKM, menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berangkat mencemar duli ke Syarahan Canselor Tuanku Muhriz kali ketiga ini. Siri Syarahan Canselor Tuanku Muhriz melambangkan kemuncak penghormatan tertinggi UKM atas naungan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Chancellor kepada UKM dalam melestarikan wacana ilmu untuk meningkatkan perkembangan pendidikan tinggi negara. Ampun Tuanku, Patik seterusnya memohon limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk Patik mengalu-alukan hadirin sekalian dan meneruskan ucapan Patik dalam bahasa Inggeris. Ampun Tuanku. Yang amat mulia Tunku Besar Seri Menanti Tunku Ali Ridauddin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang amat mulia Tunku Laksamana Tunku Datuk Seri Utama Nakiuddin Ibni Tuanku Jaafar, Pro-Chancellor of UKM, Yang amat berbahagia Tun Ahmad Sarji Abdul Hamid, Pro-Chancellor of UKM, the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Kumgiev, Chancellor of Aberystwyth University and Distinguished Speaker of the Third Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz Lecture, Professor Elizabeth Treasure, Vice Chancellor, Aberystwyth University, members of the Royal Family, distinguished guests, members of UKM Board of Directors, Deputy Vice-Chancellors of UKM, senior officers of UKM, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me thank all of you for being here today for the Third Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz Lecture, befitting the area of interest and concern of the Chancellor. The focus of the lecture series is on good governance in public and corporate affairs. This year, we are pleased to welcome the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Kumgiev, the Chancellor of Aberystwyth University, and the former Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. Lord Thomas, we are grateful that you accepted our invitation to deliver this year's lecture. Thank you very much. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Kumgiev. Lord Thomas had a distinguished legal education from Trinity Hall, University of Cambridge in 1966 to his Juris Doctorate at Chicago University. Lord Thomas has also enjoyed an illustrious and remarkable legal career, beginning from being called to the English bar in 1969 to becoming the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales and a life peer in the House of Lords. Let me share with you something more recent about Lord Thomas. Though we are all aware of Brexit, many of us in the audience might not be aware that our speaker today was the acclaimed as the man who may have unwittingly determined the future of Britain's place in the European Union and ruled that the government cannot bypass Parliament to trigger Article 50, the mechanism by which Britain would leave the EU. As Chief Justice, Lord Thomas understands that society is changing at a pace that has never before been experienced, and that judges need to plan for the uncertainties and unknown. This will demand changes in the way the judiciary works and thinks. To this end, Lord Thomas has advocated that judges engage the young people, minority groups, and also the media. Lord Thomas argues that judges must play an active part in educating the young about the importance of justice. Lord Thomas calls for court open days and school and university visits to the courts so that justice is not something alien to the younger generation. In the same vein, Lord Thomas emphasizes that judges should maintain contact with minority groups so that they can see the importance of the court system and its fairness. With the media, Lord Thomas believes that judges should have a proactive media strategy and engage with the media in order that the public can see the quality of the judicial system in action. Lord Thomas promotes these engagements so that the rule of law may be preserved in the changing, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, known as VUCA society. With great pleasure and honor, I now invite the Right Honorable Lord Thomas of Ke to deliver his lecture entitled Whether the Rule of Law. Ampun Tuanku, sekian sahaja sembah ucapan patik. Patik sekali lagi bagi pihak warga UKM menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berangkat mencemar duli ke Syarahan Canselor Tuanku Mukhlis. Sesungguhnya keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku menjadi satu penghormatan tertinggi buat patik sekalian. Patik sekalian mendoakan semoga Allah SWT melanjutkan usia Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Chancellor dan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus serta putra-putra di dalam keadaan sihat walafiat dan kekal memerintah di atas tahta kerajaan Negeri Sembilan dengan penuh keadilan dan kebijaksanaan. Menjunjung kasih Tuanku. Sekian, wabillahi taufik wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Please welcome the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Ke to deliver the lecture entitled Whether the Rule of Law.
Your Royal Highness, Yang di Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, Tuanku Murid Ibni Al-Marhum Tuanku Munawir, Chancellor of the University of Kebangan, Malaysia. Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Besar Seri Menanti, Tunku Ali Red Houdin Ibni Tunku Murid. Pro-Chancellors of the University of the UKM, Professor Tan Sri Dato Seri, Dr. Noor Aslan Ghazali, Vice-Chancellor of the UKM, Professor Elizabeth Treasure, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Aberystwyth, members of the Royal Family, Chief Justice, distinguished guests, members of the UKM Board of Directors, Deputy Vice-Chancellors, senior officers of UKM, ladies and gentlemen. It is, for me, an enormous pleasure and a privilege to have been invited to give this third Chancellor Tuanku Murid's lecture, and to be doing so as the Chancellor of Aberystwyth University, on the day our two universities are drawing more closely together. It is a particular honour because, as well as this is a lecture in honour of the Chancellor of this university, he is a most distinguished alumnus of Aberystwyth University, where, as you know, he read law, was a fellow of the university, and is the royal patron of the Alumni Club of Malaysia. As also you've been told, this distinguished lecture, named in his honour, provides everyone with an opportunity to look at and share the experience of the lecture with a focus on good governance, public affairs, integrity, and the law. I, as the title indicates, want to speak about the rule of law. Now, you may wonder, why did I choose the subject? Because almost universally, wherever you go, everyone believes in the rule of law. And therefore you might say, well, what's the point of a lecture? There is, I think, as I'll hope to demonstrate, a very good point in such a lecture. because it's so important to be able to examine not only what the rule of law entails, what the rule of the law is achieved through the judiciary, but also, and more importantly, what is it necessary to do to achieve the embedding of the rule of law in any society. In states such as the UK, and I will draw only or very largely on experience from the UK, Europe, and North America, there is a tendency to take the rule of law as granted. That, I think, is a terrible mistake. We have all the time, as I want to try and show, to do everything we can to uphold the rule of law. But before we can set ourselves on a course of action, we must know what are the constituent things you need to do to uphold the rule of law. Now, if I had simply spoken the title and you didn't have it written up there, you might think that I was actually talking about withering the rule of law or it becoming far less important. As I will try and explain, I don't think that's the case. But it is, I think, important to realize that in an age of populism, the rule of law could by some be seen as withering, and in certain countries, and as a result of certain actions, that is taking. But what I think is important in any democratic state is actually to make sure that the rule of law is embedded in the nation. Key to it is a change in culture, and it is that I want to address. Now, it's probably sensible for me to begin by saying a little bit about what is meant by the rule of law. I only want to summarize it because if the subject interests you, there are long discussions of it in excellent books, for example, that by Lord Bingham in his exposition of the rule of law, the Council of Europe's Venice Commission, and of course, your own former Chief Justice, Sultan Aslan Shah, provided comprehensive definitions. However, it might be sensible if I just remind everyone very quickly of the key characteristics of the rule of law. First, the executive government should be ruled by law and be subject to it. The rule of law requires compliance with and implementation of law made by a legislature within an accountable democratic process. There must be legal certainty. There must be the prohibition of arbitrariness and abuse of power. Access to justice must be provided before independent courts, and there must be equality before the law. And I don't also need, I think, to spell out the benefits of the rule of law. They are very clear. The rule of law underpins economic prosperity. It facilitates the good order of society, both within a state and internationally. And it ensures that the executive government of the state is held to account by acting within the rule of law. At the time of great turbulence and change in which we live, I think the cornerstone of the rule of law is the independence of the judiciary and its interdependent relationship with the executive government. But I had the privilege of addressing that particular subject here in Malaysia last year when I delivered the Sultan Aslan Shah lecture. That independence, I think, cannot be taken for granted. Many were shocked in an incident, in a case to which the Vice-Chancellor referred, when we were deciding the case as to whether it was Parliament or the executive government that could give notice under Article 50. We were castigated in the press and by one newspaper who had the headline with pictures of us with the heading, "Enemies of the People," a phrase that is truly drawn from Robespierre and the French Revolution, used commonly by Hitler, Stalin, and other dictators. We were simply deciding an ordinary question of constitutional law that has been decided over the centuries, who has the power to do something? Is it Parliament, or can the executive act without parliamentary authority? The attack on us occurred because at the time many were worried who wanted Brexit that Parliament might not approve the giving of the notice. And it was for that reason, I think, that many, and including some members of the government, acquiesced in the attack on the judges as enemies of the people. But as soon as it became clear that Parliament would approve the giving of notice, the language of the attack became mooted. I shall return to say a little bit more about that in a moment. But given such events in an old democracy such as the UK, I do not think that you can look to the judiciary on its own to uphold and strengthen the rule of law. As one of the founding fathers of the United States, Alexander Hamilton, very famously remarked, and it's true today, the judiciary is the weakest of the three branches of the state, far weaker than the executive and the legislature. And therefore, the question I want to examine is what can be done and what should be done to support judges as the cornerstone of the rule of law. And it must, in my view, in part depend upon the willingness of others to support the judges in their task, but in much larger part in establishing the rule of law as a daily part of the life of the state institutions, the professions, and the public, and to appreciate that impartial and independent justice is central to society. I want to look at each of these institutions in turn and say a little bit about the professions and the public. But I'd rather like to begin with the institutions of the state and what contribution they can make to the rule of law and the embedding of the rule of law as a part of our everyday culture. Now, the interdependent relationship between the legislature and the judiciary requires the legislature to understand the role of the judiciary, to respect and support the judiciary, and to refrain from interfering with the proper responsibilities of the judiciary. It is, and I cannot emphasize this too much, of the greatest importance that members of the legislature respect the decisions of the courts in individual cases, even when the decisions might be very unpopular or cause disquiet. They must set an example. And to show how important this is, I wanted to refer what has happened in the UK on one occasion. One of the occasions is very recent, as to what was done. There were two examples where the courts had decided that the press should not name certain people. There were different reasons in each case. But as parliamentary privilege entitles a member of parliament to say what he wishes and the press to report what he wishes, it is very unfortunate that on two particular occasions where the courts had said that a name was not to be published, on these two occasions, a member of parliament got up and named the person. Now, the circumstances do not matter, but what matters is that in those circumstances, in the UK, one found that members of parliament were not setting the right example, that decisions of the courts, however unpopular, must be followed, and members of parliament should not call that issue into doubt. What was encouraging on both occasions, however, was that those were actions of two individuals, and it was very comforting for the judiciary to see that the overwhelming bulk of those in Parliament disapproved of what has happened. But I wanted to mention those because the setting of that kind of example by members of Parliament is very damaging. But I think of more frequent occurrence is the need for support for the judiciary from the legislature. Countries vary in the relationship which members of the judiciary have with members of the legislature. In some countries, judges are drawn from those who've had a degree of political experience, and so there are long-standing relationships. In the UK, that is not the case. We have only had, over the past 40 years, one member of Parliament who's been made a judge. And generally speaking, the relations, social and business relations between members of Parliament and those who become judges have diminished. But whether you live in the kind of state where relationships are ordinary and commonplace because people have grown up together and worked together, or a bit more like the UK, the most important element of making certain that the legislature stands behind the rule of law is for the judiciary to engage with the legislature. In the UK, for example, and we're one of the very rare countries in the world that does this, the two most senior judges, the President of the Supreme Court and the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, each year have a formal evidence session in which questions can be asked in public over a whole range of issues, except, of course, any individual cases, whether decided in the past or which might occur in the future. The range of subjects is very large, and I think it has been my own personal experience, that of my immediate predecessor, who was the first to do this, and the presidents of the Supreme Court, that this has been a desirable change in the way in which the relationship with the executive works, because it's given the judiciary a first-hand opportunity in public and openly and transparently to show what the problems are, how they're tackling with them, and answer questions so that the members of the legislature can feel at least an understanding of the position of the judiciary. But it also helps, I think, make other people appreciate it, that judges can be accountable in the sense that they must explain what they do, not merely in the giving of judgments where their accountability arises out of the reasoning and public giving of judgments, but the way in which they either spend public money or organize the court system. That, I think, is very healthy for the relationship. And I think, therefore, that although at first sight it might seem that this is not a good idea, and judges may worry that this exposes them, it's not that case. It has been very fortunate. And here I wanted to return to the issue of the enemies of the people. It was my view that when the Minister for Justice had not been critical and supported the judiciary when they were attacked as enemies of the people, that the judiciary should make clear that what had happened was wrong. And I was very glad that I didn't have to do this in a speech, but I could do it in the Houses of Parliament when I was giving one of these sessions of evidence, because you were able to explain publicly to the legislature that the minister had not carried out her constitutional duty. And therefore, having an opportunity to interrelate with the legislature, I think, strengthens the judiciary and also enables the judiciary to feel it has someone, a body that will support it if things are not going well. And so, of the institutions of the state that I think is first and foremost of importance in ensuring the rule of law is embedded, is the legislature. But I wanted more briefly to turn to other areas of state institutions, and again draw on my experience of the UK. And the first of the state institutions I want to take is the civil or government service, and in particular, government lawyers. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, there was a vast growth in judicial review in the United Kingdom. And it was, I think, not welcome at first by many in the government. The government lawyers decided that they really ought to try and help ministers understand the process of judicial review, and so produced a little booklet called The Judge Over Your Shoulder. A nice picture on the front cover of a man, because of course most of the judges were then men, and a very clear booklet trying to explain to ministers what the rule of law entailed and why they had to follow the law. It's a booklet, unfortunately, out of print, but it's had a great effect, because I don't think it's possible to underestimate the importance of the government receiving from its lawyers advice as to what is required by the rule of law. Now, it is unfortunate that I cannot give you individual instances. It would be a breach of confidence for me to do so. But I am quite satisfied that on a number of occasions, as I've seen it happen myself, that government lawyers have told ministers, you can't do that, you mustn't do that, because it's a breach of the rule of law. And a public demonstration which I can share with you is the fact that the government lawyers have taken such a strict line on compliance with the rule of law is, although most politicians will complain there are far too many judicial review cases, and they're right in saying there are far too many, the government loses very, very few of them. And I think that's a tribute to the independent lawyers in the government service, and of course the other permanent civil servants who are influenced along these lines. It seems to me that this is a huge achievement which unfortunately is not recognized. And one of the areas where it has been most noted is in compliance with international conventions. There are a number of conventions which are not made part of the law of the United Kingdom, but which the government must respect as giving rise to rights under international treaties. And I think it has been a remarkable achievement how in many of those areas, particularly in ensuring that there's been compliance with decisions of the European Court of Human Rights or with certain international obligations, that the UK has done so through pressure from its own lawyers, all very privately, all done quietly. And it is, I think, very important as an institution that we have a robust and strong civil service backed by independent lawyers. It is central, in my view, to the support that the judiciary needs and to the embedding of a culture of the rule of law. The second state institution I wish to turn to is the public prosecutor. Now, although a vast amount has been written about the independence of the judiciary, there is much less literature on the independence of prosecutors. But the independence of prosecutors is of enormous importance to the rule of law. In many countries, and England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland are examples, and in most common law jurisdictions, and in some civil law jurisdictions, there is no duty to prosecute. The discretion is vested in the public prosecution service. And it is a particularly important discretion because it is very important that the discretion is exercised in accordance with the rule of law, but free from any external source, particularly pressure from the executive. And the courts back the prosecutor in this respect. They accept he or she has a discretion and will not generally interfere unless the discretion is exercised unlawfully. That has been the development of the common law, but in the European states, the civil law states, this is a principle that has grown up as in parallel to the common law in most European states. And it seems to me that the establishment of an independent prosecutor, free from such influence, is the third of the steps I would like to emphasize in the importance of institutions underpinning the rule of law. But there is one slight gloss I wish to put on this, because, as I shall come on to say, it's very, very important the public has confidence. And very recently, both as a result of legislation in Europe and as a result of case law decisions in England and Wales, there has been established by prosecutors a review mechanism. So if a crime is committed or believed to have been committed, and the victim of that crime feels it ought to be prosecuted, but the prosecutor is not going to exercise his discretion to prosecute, then there is now established a right to review that discretion. A more senior prosecutor looks at what has happened and then gives a reasoned decision as to whether the original decision was right. And why that second aspect of change is so important is it gives ordinary people who feel that if they've been a victim of crime and a prosecution hasn't been brought, an understanding as to the fact the decision has not been made arbitrarily, but has been made in accordance with the rule of law, and helps instill public confidence. And so I regard the position of public prosecutors as an essential element of embedding the culture of the rule of law. Next, I'd like to turn to the police. It's not necessary for me to say anything more about the discretion that in some states police have as to whether to prosecute. But what is important to establish is that there should be no influence of the executive government in the way in which the police decide to investigate a crime. Although it's very important that the police, the way in which they use their resources, are directed and subject to political accountability, it must and should be a clear principle that when dealing with an individual case, no one should interfere with the decision of the police. One of the decisions Lord Denning gave was in relation to it, and he expressed the principle of the independent position of the police in making individual decisions in this way. In all these things, he is not the servant of anyone, save of the law itself. The responsibility for law enforcement lies on him. He is answerable to the law and to the law alone. And I think that summarizes how, again, the police, who have a vital role in maintaining the good order of society and the rule of law, should be perceived. Accountability for the way in which the general overall police operates, but a certain culture and establishment that individual decisions on investigation and prosecution should be that which is exercised by them alone without external interference. Now, the fourth state institution to which I wish to turn, and it may surprise you I will do this, are the intelligence services. Because at first sight you might again say, well, what has the intelligence services to do with the rule of law? Why are a body that is there to protect you from very unpleasant external threats, why shouldn't they just be allowed to do anything? This is not our experience in the UK. And we've had to examine the position more closely in two circumstances. The first was as a result of the disclosure of a large number of documents by a US citizen, Edward Snowden, which were published very, very widely. And it showed an insight into for many, the way that it was perceived the surveillance powers of the intelligence services weren't being exercised in accordance with the rule of law. So in 2015, the government decided that the law should be reviewed, and recommendations were made as a result of the review that all warrants for surveillance or other intrusion should be subject to judicial authorization. The law we have as a result of this in the UK made the law clear. But much more importantly, we've appointed an investigatory powers commissioner. And it might surprise you that the investigatory powers commissioner is a senior judge, a member of our Court of Appeal, who's just been seconded for a period of 3 years or 5 years to do that work. And it has made, therefore, for the whole public can see that surveillance, the exercise of state powers of surveillance, are subject to judicial supervision and control. But there was a second thing, and much wider implication that has happened to bring the rule of law into the operation of the intelligence services. You will recall that the operations in Iraq and Afghanistan have given rise to much debate as to the extent to which the intelligence services should go in using methods to obtain intelligence. And you will recall that in the United States, there have been authorizations, as accordance with the rule of law, of methods such as waterboarding. In the UK, a very different view was taken. The tradition of the UK security services was to make sure that they did not engage in any conduct that contained the use of torture or other cruel or inhuman or degrading treatment in the obtaining of intelligence. But what has happened very recently is that this has been formalized and put under the control of the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, so that the overseas operation of the armed force of the intelligence services and what they do has again fallen within much more control of the rule of law. And I think that that, again, is a very important step in trying to get the rule of law into the everyday life of the nation. And finally, and only a sentence on this now, is the position of the armed forces. We have again taken steps to try and ensure that the armed forces, wherever operating, are within the scope of the rule of law. Some generals have not been happy. They say that we shouldn't talk of warfare anymore, but lawfare. And they say you should not be going to a lawyer before you decide whether to do something. I don't agree. It seems to me that the principle that actually military action, wherever undertaken, should be undertaken in accordance with the law is of one of very substantial importance. Now, I've tried in these few remarks to review, I think, 5 of the most important of the state institutions and to refer to the legislature, and to try and show that in each of these areas, the rule of law is being pushed into everyday life in an attempt to try and embed it in our culture. But as we know, so much activity in a state is now carried out by non-state actors. The private enterprise, ordinary companies, the professions have a very big role in our society. And I wanted very briefly to examine the position of what I would call the non-state actors, the professions. For many centuries, the law and medicine, being the oldest of the two professions, have long adhered to professional standards and codes of conduct. And they're examples of how what is in effect soft law governs their day-to-day life. And can I just examine for a moment how this works? And to be safe, I'm not going to try and do anything about the medical profession. I've been a lawyer all my life, and I think I know something about that and am prepared to venture into it. Now, it is quite clear that no amount of law and regulation can make a legal system work properly if the underlying ethical codes and codes of standards are not very strong. A court cannot do its job without it. For example, a lawyer must always act on the principle that the spirit of a code should govern what he does, not its letter. It is very important that embedding ethical standards must be instilled at the start of a career as part of the culture by which all lawyers carry out their work. And one looks, therefore, to senior people, just as you look to parliamentarians, to set the best example and also to instill the culture in the young. And judges, I think, also have a role to play in this, enforcing the duty to ensure that the duty to the court overrides any duty to the client. And also where a lawyer falls below proper standards, to be quite prepared to be publicly critical. In the UK, we found that the disciplinary proceedings of the profession were not sufficiently speedy or tough, and so we decided that we ought to take some steps to try and improve standards. And we did so partly what I might call by the carrot method, trying to make people appreciate that those that are trusted the most are those who act with complete integrity, but also publicly identifying those who fell below the standards required. And I think that is part and parcel of the way in which a legal system can be made to work most effectively, by taking the rule of law right into the profession through its codes and practices. But then I asked myself that we've had to ask ourselves the question, what about the new professions? Bankers, financiers, technologists, scientists. And here we've had to think quite carefully as to the position. And what has impelled us to think of it has been the problems that the West has suffered from as the result of the 2008 financial crisis and the huge damage that was done to the economies and to many ordinary people's standards of living. There is a feeling amongst many that the fact that there was the financial crisis and that not many have been called to account for what happened showed there was a deficiency. And the deficiency, I think, falls into two parts. First, that the law, the hard law that governed banking and the financial sector was not sufficiently rigorous and tough or clear in certain areas, and much is being done to improve that. But many have taken the view, and certainly I take the view, that unless there is a change in culture and that bankers and financiers come to see themselves as professionals, abiding by professional codes, then you will never really make the banking and financial system operate properly under the rule of law. And if one reflects for a moment about ordinary business practice, over the centuries, most people have realized that recourse to the law on its own is never enough within the business community. Unless you wish to buy yourself a dispute, and I know only very few businessmen who like to buy disputes, they prefer that transactions are conducted without the recourse to arbitration or to the judicial courts. They will make certain that they not only enter into a transaction underpinned by law, but one where they trust the other party. And it seems to us, and what we're trying to do in the UK, is to bring that view into banking and financing. And the Banking Standards Board has been established, where it is trying to draft codes and standards of conduct to govern the way in which they work. And I hope that we will be successful in this endeavor, because it really is very, very important that all the professions and everyone understands that there are codes of conduct with which you must abide, but which underpin the rule of law and make it effective. And then one final observation in relation to business and non-state actors. One of the concerns in much of the West is a perception amongst the public that large firms are not accountable for what they do. They can breach the law with impunity. It's evident, certainly in relation to the environment and some employment practices. And analyses that have been undertaken, I think, have identified 4 problems. First, that the justice system doesn't afford access to justice through the availability of affordable and effective remedies for corporate wrongdoing. That sometimes it's difficult, secondly, to establish jurisdiction over corporations. Thirdly, the use of corporate structures can be used to shield a corporation from liabilities incurred by its subsidiaries. And there is an insufficient application of human rights to corporations. Now, in the West, the ingenuity of lawyers and an acceptance by some in government that more needs to be done to enable actions to be brought against corporations is beginning to be worked on. And there is real pressure now as a result of the 2011 United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And I have not the time to go into this very important topic, but it's important not because I have any view about corporations, but what I have a view about is the perception amongst the public that they are not held properly to account. And a failure in our system where it is thought that people can do things, particularly large businesses, with impunity, does everything to undermine the rule of law and make people feel that the rule of law is not operating in their favor. But then finally, what about the public and the rule of law? The Vice-Chancellor has saved me saying much about this, because he has already explained what I've said on other occasions of the importance of going to the public and trying to explain to them in much more detail how important the rule of law and justice is to society. And it does require work by judges and others. And I don't think, certainly in the UK, enough is done to give people an understanding of the centrality of justice. Because it is so important, if you are to embed this culture of the rule of law, that people understand from an early age and throughout their lives that it is extremely important. And in this area, it is necessary just to say a couple of sentences about corruption. That would require an entire lecture on itself. But again, a failure to act on corruption, and corruption has a huge definition and is a problem in every single state, whether in some states it's a problem of people being given bribes, or in other states where there is the corruption of the use of influence to try and win over a side that is improper. For example, an inducement to promote someone because they're being helpful in the judgments they give. This is something that we have to address, because if we don't address that aspect, it's a similar question to dealing with corporations. Again, you undermine public confidence. And so the public is again instilling the culture. It seems to me an important and essential element of ensuring that the rule of law is strong. But in this task, there is a huge amount we can do together. Some people think globalization is something that should be resisted, and it's wrong. I don't have a view as to whether it's wrong, but what I have a view about is that it is inevitably affecting so much of what we do. And the change that each of our societies, particularly as a result of the digital or fourth industrial revolution, is something that is happening in very similar ways across every country. And therefore, I think one of the important factors in dealing with the public and this whole issue is working together. And there are 2 points, very brief points I wish to make. First, on the institutional front, the judiciaries are beginning to work much more closely together. In the area of commercial law, we've established a standing international forum of commercial courts, to which Malaysia is a party. And we are delighted that there we have international cooperation between institutions. But what is also important is the collaboration between universities. And it is therefore a particular pleasure and privilege for me to be here today, to be able to say that the relations being formalized between UKM and Aberystwyth are again an important part of learning from each other. I know I'm looking at this in relation to the rule of law. There are so many more other areas, but the collaboration, the learning from each other in dealing with this difficult topic. Now that's the survey I wanted to make. Where do I think we're going? I think it's self-evident that there is a fight we have on our hands to establish the rule of law. It was very striking only a few weeks ago that the President of the United States referred to one of the judges on the Ninth Circuit who had made a decision he didn't like as an Obama judge. And it was wonderful that the Chief Justice, John Roberts of the United States, intervened to say that they had an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. That independent judiciary is something we should all be thankful for. Unfortunately, I needn't quote it, the President did not agree. And it is that illustration from one of the oldest democracies in the world is one that should really make us conscious that the rule of law is something we shouldn't just take for granted, particularly in this age of populism, and we need to do much more. It is easy for me to give you other examples, but I wanted to give you a good example of where what I've been talking about seems to have worked. In Poland, there was very substantial worry as a result of the actions of the Law and Justice Party, which came to power. What it did was to try and remove judges who they thought were interfering with the particularly populist policies that they wanted to pursue. And they hit upon an idea, and unfortunately is one that has been deployed in other countries, such as during the New Deal era in America, of trying to get rid of the more senior judges whom they looked on as being awkward by reducing the retirement age. And there was huge disquiet in the European Union and also in Poland. And as a result of pressure internally from the public in Poland, and as a result of pressure from the European Union, the Law and Justice Party have begun to reverse their policy and are reinstating the judges they'd forced to retire, whom the government had regarded as inimical to their policies. Now, I give that hopeful example because it seems to me to demonstrate that if you make people understand the importance of the rule of law, that you bring the people to your side, then there is a real chance that however where someone comes to power who may not like the rule of law, who may think the decisions of judges are inconvenient, we can move against them. And so, looking at each of the institutions, the state institutions, the professions, business, and the public, it seems to me that the great task of all our democracies is constantly to work and strive to ensure that we take the steps, we promote the rule of law, and we do everything to embody the rule of law as part of the culture or DNA of every state. If we do that, then the answer to my question is clear. The rule of law will go to great places. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, the Right Honourable Lord Thomas, for delivering the lecture. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As a sign of appreciation to the Right Honourable Lord Thomas of Ke, we would like to invite Yang Berbahagia Professor Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali to welcome His Royal Highness Tuanku Muhriz Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir to present a souvenir of appreciation to the Right Honourable Lord Thomas. In return, as a sign of gratitude to His Royal Highness, please welcome the Right Honourable Lord Thomas to present a memento of appreciation together with a special gift from Aberystwyth University to His Royal Highness Tuanku Chancellor. And as a sign of gratitude to His Royal Highness, please welcome Yang Berbahagia Professor Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali to present a memento of appreciation cenderar kenangan to His Royal Highness Tuanku Chancellor. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Ampun Tuanku. Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our appreciation and gratitude goes to His Royal Highness as well as our speaker for delivering the Third Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz lecture. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to express our heartfelt thanks to all guests for joining us here this morning. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, announcing the departure of His Royal Highness Yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus. Members of audience, please rise.